I am a project manager here at ARMOR, and it's sometimes myself and sometimes just my voice you'll hear. And today we have a special co-host. It is not Ryan. It is Chris, one of our technical account managers. And he's going to be the one who's manning that question box. So again, anytime you have a question, just type it to Chris and he'll get an answer to you. Thanks, Chris. So for some of you on this webinar, you might be very familiar with ARMOR, but for others, you might need a little introduction or reintroduction to ARMOR. So at ARMOR, while we manufacture rust prevention, rust removal products, we know that our purpose is to protect your brand, your customer's brand, your parts or your customer's parts, and most importantly, your reputation. And how we do it? It's that very first bullet point on the top of your screen, which is VCI, or Vapor Corrosion Inhibiting Nanotechnology. Now, I think the bullet point you might find most interesting is the second one from the bottom of your screen. Over 90% of Fortune 500 companies, well, they rely on ARMOR. All right, so here's how we are going to break today's webinar down. We have four main categories. The first thing that we're going to talk about is what I'm calling Corrosion 101. A little bit about the science of corrosion. And then I'm going to talk about VCI, which is Vapor Corrosion Inhibiting Nanotechnology, and Desiccant, and really the differences between those two products. Then we're going to spend the bulk of today talking about the desiccant spectrum, or the types of desiccants that are out there, and how to use them. And then last, we're going to talk about a product called the Smarty Pack, which is best of both worlds, which is VCI and desiccant. So let me hop off the screen real quick, and we will get started with Corrosion 101. So we like to say at ARMOR that we are rust nerds. And I'd say we went to work taking out the arduous task of deciphering complicated graphs and slides, and we have made learning about corrosion and VCI, and today, desiccants, well, we've made it easy. So the first thing that you're looking at on your screen right now is what we call the corrosion pyramid. And looking at this pyramid, you can see that there are three sides. We have oxygen, steel, and moisture. And what I want you to remember from this pyramid all day this morning is that if you only have two of the three parts of the pyramid, corrosion or rust, well, it just won't take place. And that's how important oxygen and what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about moisture levels are when it comes to corrosion, or more importantly, preventing corrosion. So let me give you a real life example of the corrosion pyramid. So if you look at the picture on the right, on the night of April, it was 14th or 15th, 1912, about 110 years ago or 109 years ago, 12,000 feet deep down there in the ocean, there was not enough oxygen to cause corrosion. Therefore, there's really no corrosion pyramid down there. So you can see if you look at the picture, the steel bars on this sunken ship, well, they remained untouched. So keep that corrosion pyramid in mind when we talk about desiccant and moisture. Because then look at the picture on the left. When you have moisture and you have oxygen, well, you have corrosion. And then next, kind of a buzzword you hear around corrosion, or something you'll hear me talk about today, is humidity or relative humidity. And I want you to remember that we just see this all the time on TV when we're looking at the Weather Channel. When we're watching the Weather Channel and they say the dew point is this temperature and the humidity is this percentage, all they're really saying is dew point is just the temperature at which water droplets begin to form, or what we all call dew, and relative humidity is just the percentage of how much water vapor is in the air. And again, that's important, relative humidity, when it comes to corrosion. You might be saying, well, why? Why is that important? And this is what's important, and I would also say that this chart is interesting because you can see where just experts who work with metal, they start to feel confused. And that confusion will happen because parts are left in a plant or in a corner and they remain rust-free for a week. And then it just seems like rust happens overnight on one day. And that is because, and you might want to jot this number down, below 40% relative humidity, the corrosion rate is 0. there's just not enough moisture to trigger corrosion. So at that relative humidity, parts can be left unexposed and they just won't rust. So now look at the chart on your screen right now. At 65% relative humidity, corrosion starts, and then corrosion rates grow exponentially. So in a rainy day, inside a manufacturing plant, your relative humidity could increase close to 99%, and that means your corrosion rate can go up 10 times. And that's how much relative humidity can play a role. And that's also why we know in the industry that film doesn't, what people call sweat, on its own. So if you look at that picture on your screen, we're talking about film sweating. So now we know if it's not the storage temperature or the chipping temperature that causes condensation, relative humidity causes condensation. But there's something else that could be adding to the moisture problem with your customers or in your plant, and that adds to corrosion. And that is something that not all of us know. Because I think so far, for the first few minutes of this webinar, you might be like, well, I didn't know the term corrosion pyramid, but of course I knew humidity and temperature, they play a role in corrosion. But this slide's kind of fascinating because if you work with metal, you're fighting a corrosion battle, and guess what else is adding to the moisture in the air? Well, it is the wood pallets or the wood skids in your plant. So if you look at your screen right now, 20 wooden skids in a 40-foot container, they can release up to 17.5 pounds of water vapor. And as we know from the corrosion pyramid, if you have moisture and you have oxygen and you have metal, well, then you're going to have rust. And then I want to add on one more layer before we talk about desiccants and VCI. You might have, or you might say, you know what, my customers, they do have the perfect manufacturing environment. They have safe zone temperatures. Their plants are set at 40% relative humidity level or less. Well, all shipments, and especially if you have international shipments, they go through several temperature and humidity fluctuations. So, okay humidity in a warehouse may not mean okay humidity during transportation. Now, if this little part about relative humidity kind of piques your interest, we do have what we call humidity indicator cards. So if you are having the experience where metal leaves your plant and it's fine, and then it shows up at its final destination rusty, you might want to measure the humidity level during the shipment. And the humidity indicator card shows you where it maxes out during the shipment. So you throw this card in there, your shipment maybe hit 60% humidity, well then you know somewhere on that trip, 60% relative humidity was registered on that card. And then if the card doesn't change, or maybe you just get 10 or 20% humidity, you know that it's not really the relative humidity that's causing rust, but something else is causing rust. So if you want these humidity indicator cards sent to you or sent to your customer, just type that in that question box to Chris. Just say indicator card and he will get some sent out to you. All right, this slide is a write it down, jot it down moment. And I can preface it by saying this is a really rich slide of information. There are 4 easy things to remember when it comes to moisture in packaging. And these are 4 things you can take back to your team if you're experiencing rust in your shipments. Number 1, you want to jot down air inside packaging. Warm, moist environments, they cause rust. And again, we talk about that packaging rain. If you are having that, if you are having streams of water trapped inside your packaging, you are fighting what we covered earlier. You are fighting high humidity in your packaging environment. So if you can't cool your air and regulate your temperature, desiccant is going to be a lifesaver. Number 2 is the material inside packaging. If you or your customers pack a wet part, well then packing wet and contaminated parts is a moisture source. And if you are packing wet parts, well then you need desiccant. Number 3, we touched on this, those walls of packaging. So I already talked about wood, but remember that any forestry-based product, so corrugated, cardboard, all of those forestry-based products that we use for packaging, they bring moisture to your packaging. And if you're using a lot of those, you might need a desiccant. And then the last one, number 4, we're not going to spend too much time going on to poly thickness today because we could spend 30 minutes just on poly thickness, and this webinar is about desiccants. But I do want you to know that poly thickness matters when it comes to moisture. And the easiest way just to show this is have moisture represented in little dots, and the purple little dots right in the middle of the screen are representing your poly bag. So if you have a 6 ml bag, a lot less moisture to no moisture is going to come through that poly bag compared to if you or your customers are using 2 ml poly bags to ship parts. Now, again, we're not getting into poly thickness, mil thickness, but if this kind of piques your interest and you want to have Chris or someone from our technical team speak with you about your specific application and are you using the right mil thickness, all you need to do is type MIL, mil, right in that question box to Chris. Now that's it for your Corrosion 101. We want to get into right now desiccants and VCI. Because now that you understand the corrosion pyramid and the significant importance of moisture when it comes to accelerating rust, I can tell you it's not all doom and gloom because you can prevent rust. And VCI and desiccants protect metal and metal parts, but they do it in very different ways using very different chemistry. And one way to explain their difference is using kind of a give and take analogy. So VCI gives or emits a vapor that ultimately forms a protective layer on the surface of the metal, and desiccant takes. It absorbs moisture from packaging and it keeps metal corrosion free. Now, depending on your application and the particulars of the storage and the shipping environment, one method may provide better results than the other. Or, as in the case of many give and take relationships, VCI and desiccants can often work together to provide premium protection of metal and metal parts. So now what I'm going to do right now is hop back onto the screen and we're going to talk about VCI. And so if you've been on some of the ARMOR webinars before, you might have seen a few of these slides, but if you haven't, just to give you a little idea of VCI and what it is. VCI is represented right in the middle of your screen, and on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see craft paper. In order for VCI to work, all it needs is a carrier. So in this example, the craft paper is impregnated with VCI or coated with VCI. You take your metal part, you put it into that ARMOR wrap, and it provides VCI around your metal part. Now, I think this example really explains it well. So VCI is the little white dots on your screen right now. And we've swapped out craft paper and we put in poly that's extruded with VCI. Now VCI is volatile, which just means that it wants to leave the carrier that it's in and it's attracted to the metal parts and it puts a barrier around that metal that helps to keep out contamination and moisture. And when you put your metal part into that VCI bag, it prevents rust. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, how thick is that VCI barrier? We are talking about nanotechnology. So if you look at your screen, VCI is 4 to 6 nanometers thick. Now look all the way at your right-hand side of your screen. A single sheet of paper is 100,000 nanometers thick. Now let's talk a little bit about desiccants. So remember, desiccants take, and how much water they take, how quickly they take it at, and at what temperature does desiccant work depends upon the type of desiccant you use. And we're going to talk about those types in a moment, but what I want to do first is talk about desiccants as a whole. So many of us are used to seeing desiccants in the real world. Many times we see them in a shoebox. There are those little packets out there that usually say, do not eat. So I'm sure you're used to seeing consumer desiccants. Now, what might be a little bit tricky to understand is how do we measure desiccants? So first of all, we see desiccants usually described as 1 or 2 units. And most of us are like 1 unit of what? So the world of packaging, we wanted to standardize desiccants to describe how much moisture can this packet absorb. So then you can say, hey, I need X amount of units of this type of desiccant to absorb X amount of water. And that measurement is just a standardized test to say this pack, 1 unit, can absorb 1 ounce or approximately 30 grams of water. Now it's based off of, you can see that right there, a specific US military spec. If you need to have that for any reason, you can jot it down. But all I really want you to remember is when you see that 1 unit, it's describing 1 ounce of water. Now, when it comes to desiccants as a whole, there are advantages and disadvantages, just like everything in life. The advantages to desiccant are that they are simple to use. You just insert them into your container. They are clean, even at full capacity. They usually don't change shape. There are many options, which we will talk about in a moment. Desiccants can work solo, or they can work in tandem, as we'll talk about with VCI, and they're safe. They prevent rust-free, or they are rust-free. They don't use those oils. They don't have harsh chemicals. They don't have messy liquids. Now, some disadvantages. They are not always practical to adding a desiccant to each container or by every metal part. Right now, they're not really readily recyclable in traditional recycling. Once they're saturated, they can no longer continue to absorb, and they only address the issue of rust from the angle of moisture and not other contaminants or other causes of rust. So VCI addresses that better. Now you may be asking yourself, well, what type of desiccants are out there? Now we're going to talk about 3 main types of desiccants. The first one that we're going to talk about is clay. Clay is the most economical desiccant. We see it used in industrial applications. Clay desiccant, and you might want to jot this number down, is highly effective less than 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So it is highly effective until your shipment or your packaging hits that 120 degree temperature mark. Now the next type of desiccant, the one that I would say we see most in our day-to-day lives, is silica gel desiccant. And I would call silica gel the mid-range desiccant, and sometimes it's used in different applications than clay. So if you look at the bullet point, silica gel has a higher efficiency and a higher capacity. Now, when I say that, all I mean is that you can use less desiccant to absorb the same amount of moisture than if you were using clay. Now, it's better suited if you have a shipment or something that's going to be reaching a temperature above 120 degrees. And then probably the biggest reason we will see silica gel used is that it's less dusting than clay. It's just a different material, so you don't have that same dust that sometimes you do with a clay desiccant application. That's why we see it used so much in consumer goods and pharma and food application. So far we have clay, then we have silica gel, and then the next one we have is molecular sieve desiccant. And I like to call this one the Speedy Gonzales of desiccants. When you think of molecular sieve, I want you to think fast absorption. Why does that even matter? Well, molecular sieve is typically used for airlines when you want that desiccant to start working at a lower relative humidity rate, because you don't want any moisture in that airline or that packaging at all, as air is kind of speeding across, it absorbs it quickly than any other type of desiccant. So if you need a fast working desiccant, you need a molecular sieve. Now, not only are these guys faster, but they function way better at a higher temperature. And I am talking the temperatures up into the hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit, the 500, the 600 degree Fahrenheit. So they can reduce humidity at much lower levels of relative humidity than silica gel or clay, and they can function at a much higher temperature than clay or silica gel. And when I say function higher, it is just a fancy way of me saying they don't stop working. so they can get much, much hotter than clay or silica gel. Now, ARMOR has all of these desiccants. We have molecular sieve in our Smarty Packs, which we'll talk about a little bit. We have silica gel, and we have clay. So if you're starting to think, I either need to use desiccant because I have a moisture problem and I need to absorb some of that moisture from my packaging, I need to get rid of some of that packaging sweat, or I know that these items are packaged in high relative humidity, and you want to talk with Chris or a technical account manager about what ARMOR products there are, then feel free just to type shield SKUs. You can type desiccant SKUs right into that question box, and Chris will connect you with the right individual to talk about it. Now, one of our unique products to ARMOR is what we call our ARMOR SMARTY PAK. And it is a 2-in-1 rust preventative pack. So that ARMOR SMARTY PAK, one part is desiccant, and that desiccant is adsorbing that moisture. And then the other part of that pack is VCI. So not only is that pack absorbing moisture, it's also releasing ARMOR's VCI nanotechnology into the packaging to put that protective barrier around that metal. So Smarty Packs come in 3 different sizes. We have the nano, and we've already made it simple for you. We've just said, here's what it covers. We took void space and a generalization of temperature, and we say the nano covers 1 to 4 cubic feet. The mini covers 4 to 10 cubic feet, and the quad covers 10 to 35 cubic feet. But I say if this sparks an interest and you have a specific application in mind, just type Smarty Pack in that question box to Chris. He'll connect you with the right individual, and you guys can talk about your project that needs to use Smarty Packs. Now, and this guy, he can be as happy as this gentleman right here using the Smarty Pack. Now, this is a write this down, jot this down moment, because we have learned, of course, of doing training, and everybody asks us, well, how do you use storage and handling for desiccant? So I will send you this information. You can share it with your team, but you got to think about this. You have these little packs, and they want to absorb moisture out of the environment. So you've got to store them correctly. And that's easy. At ARMOR, we suggest that the #1 thing you do is remove enough desiccants, but no more than what's going to be needed to use in an 8-hour period. And then put your other desiccants in an airtight protective container to prevent water vapor contamination during movement and temporary storage and final use, because it's so important to know desiccants begin to absorb water vapor as soon as they are exposed to the air, so they must be protected at all times. There'll be so many times that we see our customers where they have their desiccant in their packaging area, and overnight the top of the container is left off. So if you take anything away from this webinar, take away and share with your team that desiccant storage and handling is important. And if for some reason you do see that the desiccant was improperly stored or improperly handled, then Chris can reach out to you and give you our what do I do if I've improperly stored my desiccant information packet. Now, this is another big one we're asked in the field, which is how much desiccant do I use? And we have made this so easy for you. Our reps and our business development officers, technical account managers, they use a simple desiccant calculator based off all the information we just talked about, and then they take into consideration your unique product, your unique temperature, transportation type, void space, storage, where's the shipment going. But none of that is something that you have to worry about. If you have a specific desiccant need and you want to work with your technical account manager on how much desiccant we would recommend to use, just type that right now in the box to Ryan. You can even type Desi need, or you can give him a quick 2-word application of words, 2 words about the application you're using them for, and he will connect you with the right individual to talk about it. Now, ways to use desiccant. After being on this webinar, we want you to keep an eye out for applications. You can use desiccants in individual packing. You can use desiccants in shipping crates. You can use them in large containers. All you have to do is remember that corrosion pyramid. If you have moisture and you have metal, and of course you've got oxygen, you're going to have rust. And with desiccant, you can remove moisture from that equation. So at this point, what we want to do is turn it back over to Chris, and he can answer either some of the questions that have come in on this webinar and a few other little pieces of information. Go ahead, Chris.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you all for being here. We have a packed morning, so I appreciate you all taking your time to learn a little bit more about desiccant with us. First, it looks like I got to almost all the questions that came in. If you asked them, I replied to them, but if you do have any extra questions, please feel free to reach out to us at it's info@armor, ARMOR VCI.com. We have someone manning that all the time, even on the weekends sometimes. So if you have any questions, please reach out. Additionally, if you have any applications or if you have any specific questions that you want to get in, please send those to info. And we also have a swag bag which has some pretty cool ARMOR shirts in it. We can do golf balls for you, a lot of different things. So please feel free to let me know. Type that into the questions box if you have an application, and we will reach out to you if you think that desiccants could be needed. I also wanted to point out that we do samples. If you need a sample of a clay Tyvek, if you need a sample of a Smarty Pack, or just a sample of a humidity indicator card for a couple of the open drums that you left on the floor and you're wondering, oh man, is there too much humidity in here? Please just reach out to us and we'll help you out with that. But again, I really just wanted to thank you all for being here today, and I'm going to pass it back over to Kristen to wrap it up.
Thanks, Chris. So when we close out of this webinar today, a survey will pop up. 1's the lowest, 5's the highest, and what we really want to hear from you is content. This is how this webinar came about. People wanted to learn about desiccants and Smarty Packs. So in that survey, tell us anything, any content that you want to learn, and that's it from Chris and I. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.